Hello, and welcome to part 3 of my video series about gospel-based parenting. If you have not done so already, I would highly encourage you to go back and check out part 1, the introduction, and part 2, what does the Bible say about spanking? In this video, we will be answering the question, what is the biblical rod? Did you know the most popular phrase that Christians use regarding spanking is spare the rod and spoil the child? I'm sure you've heard that one before. But did you also know that this phrase is found nowhere in Scripture? That's right. Spare the rod and spoil the child is not in the Bible. But if it's not in the Bible, where on earth did that phrase come from? And how did it come to be so popular? The phrase, spare the rod and spoil the child, is actually a line from a satirical, erotic poem called Huda Bras, which was written by Samuel Butler in 1662. In the poem, Sir Huda Bras the knight is locked in jail, and a widow that he has been wooing comes to visit him. She promises to get him out of jail if he will prove his love for her, as she is not impressed with his flowery and poetic words. She demands that he prove his love by engaging in sadomasochism and flagellation before she will sleep with him. The poet then compares their sinful love to a child, and spanking is mockingly commended as a way to make their love and passion grow stronger. The actual verse from the poem says, "If matrimony and hanging go, by destiny why not whipping too? What medicine else can cure the fits of lovers when they lose their wits? Love is a boy, by poets styled, then spare the rod and spoil the child." This scene is about the sexual fetishes of a dominatrix, not about parents trying to discipline their children. The idea is that periodic spanking and whipping will keep the love in an adult relationship alive and exciting. The absence of spanking in a romantic relationship will eventually spoil it. The only verse in the Bible that comes closest to the saying, spare the rod, spoil the child, is Proverbs 13:24, which states, "He who withholds his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently." So just what is the rod that is mentioned in this verse and so many others? The word translated as rod is the Hebrew word shebet. The word shebet is used in the Bible 191 times. 76% of the time, it is translated as the word tribe. Only 27 times, or 14%, is this word translated as rod. It's also translated as scepter, spear, club, staff, and even once as correction. But what exactly is a shebet? In the wisdom literature, the shebet is used as a figurative symbol of authority, a figurative symbol of the nation of Israel, and a figurative symbol representing God as our shepherd. In those days, shepherds carried two things: a rod, which is the smaller one, and a staff. We see both of these tools mentioned in the infamous Psalm 23, which states, "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." It's interesting to note that the rod and the staff were meant to comfort us, not to beat us. The rod was used to protect the sheep from enemies or predators that would seek to attack. The staff was used to gently guide the sheep along the path they should follow. Neither was used to hit the sheep. But it's important to note that while almost always the rod is used as a figurative symbol in wisdom literature, sometimes the rod was a literal one. The ancient Jews often used rods as corporal punishment. In 2 Corinthians 11:25, we see Paul talk about the fact that he was beaten with rods 3 times. And the Jews were not alone. Almost every ancient culture used rods as a form of punishment for breaking the law. Being beaten with rods was the ancient equivalent of our modern-day electric chair. I know this may be hard for us to understand because in our Western world, we don't typically use physical punishment for breaking the law anymore. But it is crucial for us to understand that physical punishment was often prescribed by Jewish law for convicted and condemned criminals. So let's check out Deuteronomy 25, verses 1 through 3. "If there is a dispute between men, and they come into court, and the judges decide between them, acquitting the innocent and condemning the guilty, Then if the guilty man deserves to be beaten, the judge shall cause him to lie down and be beaten in his presence, with a number of stripes in proportion to his offense. 40 stripes may be given him, but not more, lest if one should go on to beat him with more than these stripes than these, your brother be degraded in your sight. Notice that this whole scene is taking place in a court. Judges were charged with deciding who was innocent and who was guilty. Then a judge would determine if the guilty man deserved to be beaten. And then the guilty man was beaten in the presence of the judge, right there in the courtroom. I think it's interesting that the Bible makes note of the fact that the number of stripes should be in proportion to his offense. It even goes so far to say that they may not beat him more than 40 times, so that the guilty man would not be degraded or humiliated. So even in administering corporal punishment, they attempted to show some level of compassion. Based on this passage, we can draw some comparisons between the ancient Jewish use of the rod versus the modern Christians' use of the rod. Who was supposed to be punished with a rod? Ancient Jews taught that only convicted criminals should be punished with a rod. But modern Christians say that children should be punished with the rod, and they usually emphasize that the rod is for young children, particularly children that are 1 to 6 years old. Who is supposed to administer the punishment? For the ancient Jews, only a judge or officials of the court were permitted to administer a punishment. But modern Christians teach that parents, grandparents, teachers, and more can and should administer corporal punishment. What kind of instrument or tool is used in punishment? The ancient Jews used a rod or a whip. But modern Christians use various tools, including their hands, belts, spoons, shoes, branches, etc. Why is a person punished with a rod? The ancient Jews punished people who had broken Jewish law and had been found guilty in a court of law. In contrast, modern Christians punish with a rod for a wide variety of reasons, ranging from throwing food on the ground to punching a sibling, or from coloring on the walls to telling a lie. Where should you beat someone with a rod? Ancient Jews beat people with rods only on the back. But modern Christians advocate for beating with a rod on the butt, the hands, the legs, and the fingers. How many times can you beat someone with a rod? Ancient Jews set a limit of no more than 40 stripes. But modern Christians have a wide variety of answers to this question. Just a few verses later, we find another example of Jewish law requiring severe physical punishment. Verse 11 states, "When men fight with one another, and the wife of the one draws near to rescue her husband from the hand of him who is beating him, and puts out her hand and seizes him by the private parts, then you shall cut off her hand. Your eye shall have no pity." So your wife tries to save your life, and she loses her hand in the process. This kind of severe physical punishment for breaking the law is not something that we are used to, but these kinds of punishments are still practiced in other cultures to this day. A few chapters prior to this, we also find this interesting instruction for physical punishment. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and though they discipline him, will not listen to them, then his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city, at the gate of the place where he lives. And they shall say to the elders of his city, "This is our son. This our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and fear." Notice that this passage repeatedly emphasized that the stubborn and rebellious son would not listen to his parents. He would not obey the voice of his mother and father. The parents also say that their son is a glutton and a drunkard. This would lead me to believe that this passage is not talking about a stubborn toddler. And even when the parents brought him out of the city, it was still the elders of the city that had to determine if he was guilty. And it was the elders of the city that stoned him to death, not the parents. So while we know that these passages are not talking about a little child, is it possible for us to know how old this man was? The answer is yes. In Jewish culture, a boy becomes a man, a legal adult, at the age of 13 when he has his bar mitzvah. Bar meaning son, and mitzvah meaning commandment. Bar mitzvah literally means son of the commandment. Under Jewish law, children were not obligated to observe the commandments, nor were they held accountable for keeping them. So we can conclude that the stubborn and rebellious son that was being punished is a young man over the age of 13. While children were exempt from punishment for breaking Jewish law, their culture was indeed one that punished legal adults that had been legally convicted as criminals in severe ways. They beat them with rods and whips, cut off their hands, stoned them to death, hung them on trees to die. But these punishments were never administered by parents to children, any more than a parent today would punish their rebellious child with the electric chair. So whether you believe the biblical rod is a figurative one or a literal one, neither interpretation will ever allow for parents to hit their children. If you've not done so already, please check out Part 1, the introduction to this video series. Part 2, what does the Bible say about spanking? And today, we answered the question, what is the biblical rod? Since the 4 key verses that people use to defend the use of the rod are all found in the book of Proverbs, be sure to check out Part 4 in the Gospel-Based Parenting video series, How Should We Interpret Proverbs? As I mentioned before, this series is based on my book, Gospel-Based Parenting, which is available for purchase on Amazon.com. You can also download a free copy of my book from my website, www.peacefulworldschoolers.com. Every chapter includes a list of reflection and application questions that are meant to inspire discussions between you and your spouse, your small group, or even your church. These discussions are so important and will help you to reflect on your own personal experiences, analyze your own biases or preconceived ideas, and apply biblical truths in a way that will transform your family as you live out the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if you have enjoyed this series so far, please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you'll be able to continue to receive updates on my latest videos.